Voices serves as the megaphone for individuals who have endured transformational change. By highlighting trials and triumphs, our desire is to create a safe space for pivotal conversations, which in turn will deepen the story and provoke hope for you, our listeners. As you may know, change is never easy, but it is inevitable. You are not alone in what you're facing. Your transformation is possible, purposeful, and now. And here's Erin Wiggum, founder and managing director of New You, with this week's guest.
Welcome to another edition of New Voices. My name is Erin Wiggum. I am your host. Also serve as managing director of New You. New You is a way for an individual to imagine, discover, and actualize a 2.0 version of yourself. However, in addition to that, New Voices, it serves as a megaphone for individuals who have endured transformational and pivotal experiences and are here to tell their story. We have a wonderful guest with us today. This woman is truly a powerhouse. She is a scholar. She is she is a transplant to Tulsa now. She is, I know her to be extremely thoughtful and careful in how she engages folks, and she does everything with her heart. And we had an exchange a couple of years ago before she moved here. She was just visiting at that time, and she shared the things that she wanted to do. And then next thing you know, she went through our program, New You. And on the back end of that, she's now segued through Tulsa Remote, shout out to Tulsa Remote, to now be a Tulsan. And so what I know her to be is a woman who follows through. I bring to you none other than this very dynamic individual, Dr. Ashley Dash, who is the founder and CEO of Resume ATM. Welcome, Dr. Dash.
Thank you, Erin. I feel like, was he talking about me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
You are more than welcome. Every conversation with, what is your story? What is the Ashley Dash story?
The Ashley Dash story, there's so many things that happen, but I can say the pivotal point for me in which everything probably changed is when I was in college. Okay. So I did all the things you're supposed to do. You go to college, you pick the right major, the business major, the marketing concentration. Yep. I had several corporate internships under my desk. I visited career services. I did everything right, quote unquote, right? Yep. And I graduated and I could not find a job.
Wow.
I was an unemployed college graduate right before the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. And if anybody remembers those times, life was lifing before that phrase existed. So I think that was the moment in terms of when everything changed in terms of my trajectory, my journey, what I thought I could be or should be. You just question everything. So that is actually the time in which probably set up the stage for everything I've experienced since.
Okay. All right. And so you're in college. What school did you go to?
I'm at Winthrop University. Shout out Eagles.
Okay, nice. And where are you actually from?
I'm from South Carolina.
Okay.
I wasn't born there, but that's where I was raised, high school, college, kind of jumped around and things like that. So that's home.
Got it. And so you started to come into form while you were in undergrad?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And so you get this business degree. Mm-hmm. All right. What leads you to, your master's is in?
Business administration. So I have an MBA.
Okay, MBA. And that's Winthrop again?
No, that was actually University of Phoenix.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I was working full-time and going to school full-time.
Got it.
At the time because I wasn't working. So that was like a strategic move.
Okay.
So during, when I was looking for a job, you can't become an intern unless you're in school.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I wasn't in school anymore because I had graduated.
Got it.
So I wasn't landing positions. I couldn't find a job. No one was hiring, but there was internships available. Yeah. So I had a conversation with some folks. I said, well, what if you went back to school? Well, all the other schools require you to have a GMAT and have like all of these experiences and cost additional money that I didn't have at the time.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I can go back to school. University of Phoenix was an option at the time.
Got it.
And I enrolled in school, and then I was able to get an internship that then led to a full-time position.
I see.
So that's how that landed.
Okay. And so let's talk about that real quick. Mm-hmm. So what does it feel like, or can you speak to some of the frustrations or feelings that you had when you're doing the right things and don't feel like you're getting the right results?
Yes. So for me, it was really a feeling of shame, okay, to be honest, because I feel like when, I was raised in church, I come from a single parent household, but very family oriented. Yeah. So everyone knew I went away to school, right? Everyone doesn't go away to school. Some people stay local, they go to technical college, nothing wrong with that, but I went away. Right. So I was coming home on weekends. My family knew, my deacon was saying, how are your grades? Everyone knew that I was part of this journey, and they were supporting me and just helping me along.
All eyes on you.
All eyes on me in the best possible way. Not in a way that was discouraging, but just like supportive. How can we help? We'll pray for you. Right. It's exam time. We'll send you some, nice things.
Package.
Things like that. So to kind of go through this process, have all these wonderful grades and graduate, have graduation celebration, and then feel like I was disappointing everyone. Yeah. It was just this crushing shame and frustration. And I still get emotional when I think about it, because I remember calling my mom just in tears because I didn't have the words. I couldn't articulate how I did everything I was supposed to do. I saved the money, right? So say, have an emergency fund. Yep. I saved the money to have an emergency fund. But what happens when the emergency lasts longer than your funds, right? So there was just this overwhelming sense of frustration, shame, confusion. I was mad at God. Yeah. There was a lot of things happening in that moment.
Yeah. No, I can definitely really sympathize with that experience. When I was coming out of undergrad, I had my degree in finance, and I did the internship. I was at three years straight at PNC Bank. Okay. I was doing well. I was in a management training track. Every time I came, we had a break. They called us back to do work. So my winter break, my spring break, they would call us back. You can come on in. We'll pay you X amount of dollars an hour. But like it was all good, right? And I get to my graduation about 3 or 4 weeks before I graduate with my bachelor's degree. PNC reaches out to us and says that my position that I was coming into had been eliminated through attrition because they bought a bunch of banks along the Eastern Seaboard. And when they bought those banks, then they had people already doing those roles.
Positions.
So exactly. So my position was eliminated. And when I tell you, like you said, crushing, like I was like, what did I just, like, we were having monthly meetings with the COO, CMO, and CFO and CEO of PNC Bank at that time, right? As interns. There was a group of like 30 interns. And it was like a real investment in the path forward. They had an amazing internship program. And I'm thinking like, what did I just do all that for if we come to a closed door now, right? And so I know exactly what that feels like and the frustration that comes with it. And when you have to go and take that job that you feel like is beneath where you've positioned yourself to be, right? And that was my story, is that I had to go and take this job. It was like a very entry-level job, and I was prepared for a management training track, right? And so that was an additional slap in the face to me, right? And so I definitely can, understand where you're coming from with that. Like, it's like letting the air out of your sail, the wind out of your sails.
It really is. And I feel like you're kind of lucky because I couldn't get an entry-level job.
Wow.
When I was applying for entry-level jobs, they told me that now that I had a degree, I was overqualified. I was overqualified for those positions. And they no longer wanted to take a chance on me because they said, as soon as you find what you're looking for, you're going to leave. So they wouldn't hire me.
What?
And then when I applied for the let's say, corporate entry-level positions, I didn't have enough experience. So I was in this weird catch-22 where no one wanted to hire me. And while all that was happening, we were preparing, we didn't know at the time, but 2008, preparing for the Great Recession. So all the economic indicators were also starting to slow down and lag. And then, when that starts happening, companies start putting the brakes on things.
Right.
So I was living off savings. Like there was no part-time job. There was no entry-level job. It wasn't any of that. For me.
And so how long of a period of time was that?
That lasted probably a good 3 to 6 months, I believe, before I found my internship. I enrolled in school. That was like the I guess the semi-solution.
Okay.
So I rolled into school, but in order to do that, I had to take out student loans, right? To survive. More debt to survive. And then that landed me into my internship. And then that internship allowed me to get more experience and then roll into a full-time job.
Got it. So you finish your master's. Did you get placement after you finished your master's?
I was actually already working. So I was doing double duty. So once I was doing my master's with like University of Phoenix at the time, they were set up. I was actually going on site. So I wasn't like doing like the online program like they have now. So it was for working adults.
Nice.
So I was almost like in this executive program. The way they figured out my work schedule, they figured out. The admissions coordinator worked it out.
Yeah.
So I was like the youngest person in a room full of adults who were like working. And I was working too at that time. I was working in doing sales analysis. So I tell people I was an Excel nerd. That was my first job. So I was working full time and then going to school at night. So that was my goal. And then when I graduated with my MBA in 2010, shortly thereafter, I got my first job in HR.
Got it. Okay. And so you get your this first job.
Yes.
Did you feel like an adult, or what were your feelings at that time?
For the first job or for my first HR job?
The first HR job.
The first HR job. I did feel a little bit like an adult, to be honest. I did feel like, okay, finally things were starting to kind of come my way. It was a little disheartening in terms of the salary. Because again, this Great Recession is like my story. They didn't give me the amount of money that I wanted. So, and I wasn't trained in terms of salary negotiation and all those types of things. So they gave me the offer. I saw the number and
took it.
I didn't take it. The first time when they first called me for my first job, and I don't even remember what the number was. I just said yes. Because that's the amount of money that I needed. Like I just needed to survive. But for the HR job and they gave me the number, I was disappointed. And I was like, I did all this work. I know I'm doing well, but this isn't what I'm looking for. So I went back and had conversations, or attempted to have conversations with like my friends. And no one at the time, no one would tell you what they made in terms of salary. Even like close friends, it was like this closely guarded secret. And then my family and friends, they worked in like retail, or they worked in like, in mills, or they were domestic workers. They were just not in corporate America. So they couldn't really help me have those conversations. So I just went on Google and I just started doing some research and wrote a letter and says, hey, I'm super excited. I really want this position, but I feel like this number isn't what it should be. So I wrote a letter and I took it to HR and I gave it to them and I kind of like scurried away. And after a couple of days, they came back and they offered me more money.
Wow. Look at you. Good job of self-advocating. I love that.
Yeah. So it was my first time and they said yes. And I started working in HR.
And is that where you wanted to be, was HR?
I don't know that's where I wanted to be. I'm going to say probably not. I was a marketing major. So in my former life, I had this really cool idea of being like a super cool advertising executive, right? With an expense account,
So you wanted to be Gina Waters.
Yeah,
that's
basically.
What I mean. He was trying to be Gina Waters.
Essentially, yes. But they don't tell you what's required of that. You need to have additional degrees, not degrees, electives and classes. And I didn't take art, or I didn't take graphic design. I didn't do all the things. So that wasn't something that I would be hired to do. And I actually hated management classes in college. Like it was always like the most boring.
It's
dry. It was just dry, right? Dry. So the fact that I ended up in HR to me is hilarious. But I was a talent acquisition recruiter.
Got it.
Right. So I was a happy career fair lady. So I was at career fairs, handing out people, telling people we have jobs. I was that person. So it didn't really feel like HR, if that makes sense.
Got it.
I was out there just I feel like it was marketing. I was talking to people, talking about the employee brand, telling people wonderful place to work, and you should come on over.
And a lot of that is a part of a marketing strategy. That's how companies really find their footing in the workforce and throughout the community, is showing up at those things. And so marketing has a very heavy overlap with recruiting in that way. That's good. And so when you think about what you had worked for, with your degrees and what the path that you're blazing, right? Can you speak a little bit to how you navigated in the South, in South Carolina.
Yes.
Okay. Being a Black woman, educated, accomplished, and trying to accomplish. How did you navigate? Like, what was that road like? And I'm asking this specifically around the being in the South, right? And where an outsider may not necessarily see a path, right? Or maybe even someone from there may not see it. Like you said, your friends and stuff are working at retail and whatnot, right? And so like, but when you're trying to carve your own way, holding on to a dream, holding on to aspirations, can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like, and maybe what was either deflating or what was encouraging about it?
There were both points, to be honest. So I worked in the automotive industry, transportation, and mostly white males, right? But I went to Winthrop, which is not an HBCU, right? So that wasn't a problem for me in terms of navigating those spaces. But the interesting power dynamics, I think I was unaware of how powerful I was. I was unaware of what being a Black woman with an MBA in corporate America, what that meant.
What that means,
To me, it was normal. For me, it was regular. So I didn't feel a certain way about it. I think other people felt a way about it, and they treated me as such, and they projected, but I couldn't figure out why. Like, I just knew there was something there, and it's hard to articulate what it was, but there wasn't a lot of direction. It was more of like I had to figure things out on my own. But there were a lot of people I just feel like God placed in my life. I call them angels just along the way. I recall this very particular incident where I was walking down the hall and I said hello to this white guy, for lack of a better word, and he just ignored me, like looked me straight in the face and just did not respond, did not whatever. And I was like, what did I do, right? I don't know him. He doesn't work in my department. I was just being friendly. And my, we work in those quads, right? So I had, I don't want to say his name, but I'm going to say Russ. I'll say his first name. So Russ saw this, and he was my quad member, and he was also white male, but he was just so friendly and happy. He worked in like the sales division, and we kind of just became close because, you're sitting in the same quad. And he saw it, and he just said something about it. He's like, don't you ever do that again. Like, he just really was an advocate in that moment for me. And again, Russ was, to me, he was just a cool person. Other than him being a nice person, I didn't really have a lot of information about him. So every time I saw the guy afterwards, he would always speak. But later on, I discovered that Russ was actually related to like our COO, right? He was like, so he had the influence. He had the influence in order to kind of to advocate for me in a way that I didn't know I needed. And I feel like throughout my career, there's always been a sponsor, an advocate, an angel that's been there to like guide me, where they saw what was in me before I knew it was there. Right. There were other people, like older, I call it Black people in my career, and they would say, you can't wear that. You can't dress like. They would just pour into me like, well, I'm like, why not? It's not that big a deal. They're like, you can't wear that, right? And it was just a lot of those side conversations, a lot of those people advocating for you. And you just start learning like, oh, there's people that you can trust. And there's some people that maybe there should be some distance, and that's okay, right? And you just start navigating that, and then you start learning, oh, that's why you not really excited to see me. Right. Oh, that's why. It's just a little disheartening, a little disappointing when you realize the reason. Well, it's one thing to not know at all, but when you start realizing, oh, okay.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. Oh, I intimidate you, and I just by existing. Right. It's difficult to articulate, it's difficult to experience. And at the time, back in the day, therapy is really wonderful now. We wasn't really talking about therapy that back in the day. So there wasn't really like a safe space to go to. Besides
or DEI. DEI wasn't a thing yet.
So there wasn't really a lot of places you could go to other than like, your friends or like church or, just the private conversations that you had with folks.
Right. And what's amazing about that is you're coming out of HR. And even usually that stuff will be handled in HR. Well, even as an HR person, there's not a place like you're saying, like, where do I go and have these safe conversations around my existential experiences? Like this is like, I'm not doing anything good or bad, in or out. I'm just my existence
Yes.
is, is trying for different groups of people, right? And so, okay, so
and part of it was age. So I was maturing though. I was like learning in corporate America. So I probably wasn't doing, let's say, things right all the time.
Right.
But I was always the youngest person in the room.
Yeah.
So I was still learning. So there was a little bit of everything. It was the age, it was the gender, it was the education, it was everything.
Right.
It all happened at the same time.
Wow. And so how long were you in that role or in that working in that group?
I was in that role for about 2 years.
Okay.
And then just started having not the best experiences. So I was looking for an escape, if I'm going to be honest. Yep. And looking for an escape. And I found one. It was a temporary project assignment around HR compliance, which is to me horribly boring, right? Yes. It's not a horrible role, but it's just super boring. But I had a mentor at the time, and they were just kind of sharing, sometimes you want to volunteer for the role nobody else really wants, right? Just really good experience. Yep. And it was at Mercedes-Benz. And I was like, even if this role is temporary, if you have Mercedes-Benz on your resume, like it should be a little easier, right? To kind of go through this process. So I applied for the position and they gave it to me. And I was so confused. I was so confused. But they gave me the job. And I was like, oh. It was the first time I've ever driven like first class on a plane because you have to fly in for the interview. First time having car service. So I got exposed to the Lux life. A different type of life. Like I didn't know this was real. And I moved to Mercedes-Benz.
Okay, cool. And what was that experience like?
It was amazing. To be honest, it was one of the best experiences. One of the best working experiences I've ever had. There was lots of transition happening at the time, but I ended up having my first Black woman supervisor, and she was just a mentor and an advocate, and she just knew how to talk to everyone. She just had that special magic, right? If you could bottle that up and sell that to managers, I'd be a billionaire, right? Like she just was able to kind of move and shake, and she had a very she had an intergenerational denomination, like. We were all different on her team. We had Black men, white men, we had Romanian, like we had a very culturally diverse, all types of team. And she just created this this unity and unit among us. Wow. Where we had fun and we enjoyed each other. And the things that you would want in your supervisor, she had. Wow. But you didn't mind staying late. You didn't mind saying, oh, I'll come in early. It was that type of environment that she created within her department amongst a larger HR department that didn't also have that same culture. So we had a culture within a culture.
Yeah. And, I always speak to that, how, the difference between leadership and management. And, I'm a firm believer that you manage processes and lead people. And what it sounds like is this woman was a leader. Like she's actually cultivating people. And when you're cultivating people and they're growing and they're becoming and they're evolving, then they don't have a problem staying late. They don't have a problem doing this. They don't have a problem. They'll run through a wall for you if they feel like they're being poured into and cared for. Exactly. However, if it's just being managed and it's just everything's about a measurable or a KPI or you did this or deadlines, like then eventually people will look for their way out of that situation. In most cases,
they will. Yeah. We will. I call my work brother. I still talk to my work brother. He was my coworker under her reign is what I call it. People that I talk to from that organization, I'm still connected to them on Facebook during that space, even though it's been years later and I was kind of the person that doesn't really make work friends because work is separate than home life. We really created friends and friendships and it was amazing. To your point, yes, she was definitely a leader. And that's what I learned about that's when I became a certified career coach. Okay. And that's really where some of that magic pixie dust from career kind of came to the forefront. Got it. Because I was learning, this is an entire field. This is its own industry. There's things you can actually do just in this space.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go. That's a great pivot into the coaching and the work that you've done in that. So what gave you the gumption to just go for this coaching career and kind of like step into your own real magic?
To be honest, I wasn't actually trying. Okay. So a lot of my career successes typically come at the feet or heels of devastating career experiences. Got it. So right before in 2019, I lost my job. Okay. No, I had moved on. So we moved on somewhere else. I moved on several times. I've move around. But I lost my position.
Got it.
But it was a job that I took because I needed to work, but I didn't really want to be there. So when I lost it, I was like, makes sense. Like I wasn't even like upset.
Yeah.
I understood. There was no confusion. But it led to that feeling again where I had to move back home.
Got it.
And I was in that same 2008 feeling where like, I did everything right.
Right. Here we go again.
Now I'm more educated now. I have an MBA. At the time I was in a doctorate program. I had stopped because I couldn't finance it.
Yeah. You have experience.
I have experience now. I have experience Mercedes-Benz. I had been in Silicon Valley at that time, Los Angeles, Atlanta. Like why am I back here again? And I was like, what happened again?
Yeah.
And during that experience, life happens. And I had to move home. I ended up going through like pre-foreclosure. I had a home that I had bought. And my grandmother was sick. She was in the hospital and she wasn't getting out. So I was the only person in the family not working. So I became the primary caregiver for that. During that, my uncle also ended up in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
They're in the same hospital, 2 different floors. So I just feel like life was falling apart. Like the only thing that wasn't falling apart was like my mind, right? Like I was still holding on by a thread.
Right.
And I just remember having just a personal, private time with God and saying, hey, I'm not sure what I did. I'm not sure what I did wrong, but I know this isn't what you have for me.
Wow.
I know this isn't what you have for my life.
Yeah.
And I repent, for anything known and unknown sin, right?
Yeah.
And I want to change.
Yeah.
And I feel like in that moment, he asked me 3 questions, which is kind of where a lot of my coaching comes from. He said, okay, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to work in global human resources. I had kind of discovered that was kind of my jam.
Okay.
He said, okay. And he said, how much money do you want to make? I had made 6 figures before. I was like, I kind of want to get back to 6 figures.
Okay.
So I was like, at least $100,000.
Yeah.
And I remember him distinctly asking me, where do you want to work? And I remember the response so vividly. And I said, I will work anywhere in the world. That's what I remember answering. And shortly thereafter, there was an opportunity for me to apply for a job in Japan.
Yeah.
And I ended up working in Japan.
Perfect segue. I was just about to go there. Yeah.
So that's actually where a lot of the coaching happens.
Got it.
From that experience. A lot of people had been asking me questions around careers, like, how are you doing that? And I'm like, I'm just applying.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, I'm applying too. And it
ain't working for me.
It's not working the same. So I was already getting people having conversations with me in that space. And then I got to go to Yamaha. I worked for Yamaha in Japan, our global headquarters. And we did executive mentorship. We did a lot of coaching. We did a lot of leadership development. And I graduated with my degree, which is strategic leadership, which is all coaching, leadership development, all of those high level skills. And that's really where coaching actually, I said, the fruition kind of arrived. Because a lot of people were just asking me questions and we were just having, at the time, I didn't know these unofficial coaching conversations around career and just life, because it's not just one area of your life, careers. It's all areas of your life. It's a very holistic conversation.
Right. Let's talk about that transition to Japan. All right. Where were you at? And then did you feel at home in Japan? Like what was that experience like, living in a whole nother culture and, not knowing the language or
No, I do not.
Right. Okay,
That's a common question. I do not speak Japanese.
Yeah. So let's unravel that.
Yeah. So I always tell people my conversation, my story around Japan is complicated.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because I moved to Japan September 11th, 2019.
Got it.
Right. And if everyone remembers, 2020 was during COVID, right?
Yeah.
So I was in Japan during COVID, which is not
ideal.
It's not ideal.
Yeah.
It's not something you can necessarily explain.
Yeah.
You have to experience.
Yeah.
But to answer your very logistical questions, I was in Iwata, Japan.
Okay.
That's in Shizuoka Prefecture.
Okay.
That's about 3 hours, I'll say south-ish.
Is prefecture like Providence?
Yeah,
province.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about 3 hours south of Tokyo via the Shinkansen, so the super train, the super fast train.
Yep.
So it takes about 3 hours for me to get to Tokyo back and forth if I wanted to go on the super train. So that's where I was.
Got it.
Some people are more familiar with like Nagoya area, so about an hour north of Nagoya.
Okay.
But they said it was the countryside is what they told me.
Yeah.
They said it's a very country area. Japan does not have the same understanding as country.
I can tell you about country.
Right? Because I'm from the country. So when they said that, I was expecting, like, I grew up on a dirt road. I grew up with trees. Like, that's what I was expecting. And I got off the train station. There was like a Louis Vuitton store. There was an Apple store, a Mac store, makeup and electronics. I was like, this is not the countryside.
Okay.
I was about a 15-minute walk from the train station. So But the Yamaha was like in the industrial manufacturing area. So it wasn't anything like it was. I guess they consider that country, but if you compare it to Tokyo, it was fine. But it was really cool in terms of it was a very difficult first 6 months.
What was difficult about it?
The culture. It's the culture of being American and being in Japan. So I wasn't in an expat community. So I didn't have those expat experiences.
So you were thrown into the water.
I tell people all the time, I was in Japan.
Got
it. So there were a lot of things that you're just not used to talking about. So like there was no visual diversity. So when you walk outside, you just see all Japanese people. Right. And that's not something you expect because in America, you walk outside, you'll see different variety, right? Even if you live in like a homogeneous society, like area, you'll still see mixes of this or that. That did not happen. It was just Japanese people. There were no white people. They was just like Japanese people. So that was a little interesting, something that I just had to adjust to that you don't really know is a problem until you experience it. I did not speak the language and they do not speak English, at least a lot in my area, or they're uncomfortable speaking English because of the culture. So lots of struggles in going to the post office, trying to go to the grocery store, having to
pointing at stuff,
things. Thank goodness colors and numbers are like universal, right? We have Google Translate and people ask, well, didn't you use Google Translate? And I'm like, yes, but it takes a long time. It doesn't translate handwriting. It only translates, like, it's just things that you just have to learn to adjust. But they had a support system for me. So they showed me how to navigate to and from home from the train station. We had tests, right? It's like, okay, this is the train you take. This is the time you take it. This is how you get there. So lots of pictures and diagrams. But everything is just so different in terms of Japan is very talking in terms of the culture. They're very community-based, tight-knit, respectful, polite, but polite doesn't necessarily equate to friendly. And sometimes that was difficult for me to understand because I'm Southern. We're friendly.
You're friendly.
Right?
Come on over.
Come on over. Lack of just like religion or religious understanding. Physically, I just look different. I am Black. Some people had never seen a Black person before. So sometimes there were like people taking pictures on the train, makes you a little uncomfortable. I have locks. So then my hair was even longer than it is now. So I would like kind of pile it up high on my head and you just be like a walking billboard. It just, when you walk through any city and you just feel and know everyone is staring at you, it just becomes a little much. So I think that's my habit. We talked about this earlier. I took my sunglasses off. I developed sunglass habit from Japan because prior I didn't really wear them that often. But I feel like it was the only time I could kind of create a barrier when I was in public. Just because I was normally like the different one. Right. But after a while, they got normalized. Like, you know, the grocery store people get used to seeing. So the places that they've got used to seeing me, it wasn't a big deal. But that first 6 months was a struggle. And then at work, English wasn't as high in terms of the way they could speak and understand. And I was speaking too quickly because I didn't understand global English where you use shorter sentences and you slow it down and you do those things. And it was just a lot. And I want to say that first 6 months, I was like, can I give you guys this money back? I want to go home. It got really like tough. My mom was like, well, you're already 6 months in. She's like, you only have 6 months left, right? Like you can make it. You can come home. So I said, okay, that's what we'll do. And I think around the 8th or 9th month, I finally kind of found my footing, my groove. I got to meet my coworkers and actually have like relationships with them. I had to learn about like their culture. Like we had to bridge to each other. And that happened. And then COVID happened. And then you're like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to be in America right now. So then I renewed my, we both renewed my contract. So I was in Japan for about 3.5, almost 4 years.
Wow. Okay. Did you end up picking up the language at all?
I did not end up picking up the language.
Wow, okay.
So initially I was learning to count. I was using some of the words. I can't write it because there are different levels of kanji and different things like that. But I was starting to do that. But when COVID happened, everyone's working from home. So you're not really in the office.
True.
Right. So you really can't practice. And because I had such a high level of English and I only spoke English, I didn't speak any other languages. I was that horrible American, only speaks English. It actually increased everyone else's English skills because they had to communicate
so
with
they were
me
practicing
English.
on you.
So they was practicing on me, but I couldn't practice on them. So I never got that opportunity. I know a couple of words, but.
Yeah. Got it. Oh, wow. That's interesting. So you're in Japan. You come back to the States as COVID is lifting, right? And you go back to where, South Carolina?
Yeah, I came back twice, technically.
Okay.
So after my contract ended, I was kind of bouncing around and really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I did end up coming back home. And I was like, I don't really know if I like this. So I tried to figure out, so I was actually in like the DC metro area. Yeah. So I was like in the DMV area. Yep. I was there for a little while. I have family there. And it just wasn't kind of the vibe. Yeah. So I ended up going to South Carolina and I found a remote job. And that ended up kind of trying to get back to Japan.
Got it.
And I was there temporarily, but I was like, yeah, that's not it either. Yeah. So then I came back to South Carolina.
Got it. And then we meet at one of our events at Tulsa's Brightest event last spring.
Yes, that was when I was the first time I was back from Japan.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we have a quick encounter. You said, I'm going to come back and, I'm considering Tulsa, you know. And then you go through Tulsa Remote. Once again, shout out to Tulsa Remote. Justin Harlan and the wonderful work that they're doing over there.
Amazing.
You come through New U, and then all of a sudden, you come back here on a visit for New U to conclude the New U Global track. And you say, hey, Aaron, I'm moving to Tulsa.
It was, it's kind of how it happens. Tulsa, once I had been here to visit and kind of got exposed to it, I was like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah. Like Tulsa was never on the map. It was never on an
wasn't
idea.
On mine either.
Okay. Yeah. So it wasn't like, but I don't want to say that as it was a negative thing. It just wasn't a place. It just wasn't there. So when I got here, everyone's so friendly and nice. And I was like, this doesn't feel real. Right. And I thought part of it was just because I was part of New U. So like when you're New U, you kind of have like a manufactured friend group. Right. So like you're doing everything together, you're doing dinners. Yep. But then I came back and I was like, oh, no matter, like the Uber driver, the Uber driver is not New U, right? Yeah. They're friendly. Airport, like wherever I went, it was like this feeling of home. And I was like, oh, I could do this. Yeah. And South Carolina wasn't feeling very homey anymore. It felt like a place I had outgrown. So I was looking for something and somewhere new, but somewhere that felt like home. Right. I didn't answer this question earlier you asked around Japan. Japan eventually felt like home. Okay. That's actually why I went back the second time, because it was the longest time I had ever stayed in one position, in one role, in one place as an adult.
Got it.
Right? So typically the way my career has worked, around every 18 months, 24 months, I'm rotating to something new. I'm out, right? Getting promotion, trying for something new. Yep. So Japan had felt like home because I had an apartment. I had been there 3 years. Like this was my place. And it wasn't, and so I was skipping around the country. So when I came to Tulsa, I was in DMV, I was in South Carolina, I had friends in LA. So I was visiting, them. And when I came to Tulsa, it felt like home. It had the homey vibes. It had like that feeling. And I was like, oh, I could do this. And then you have the opportunity around, Tulsa Remote, where I was working remotely. And I was like, well, you could come for a year and see how you like it. And I was like, well, I know some people, right? I have a position. Like, why not? It wasn't like it was like, why wouldn't I try? Right. Because I already experienced it. Everyone was lovely and friendly and have all of these opportunities. And then I moved here and I was like, this is amazing. This is great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah. I have a very similar story where, once I was approached about a Tulsa option, I was in higher ed at the time. Okay. And Atento Capital was reached out to me. Mike Bosch reached out and said, hey, we see what you're doing in Pittsburgh. We'd love for you to come do it in Tulsa. And we had this conversation. And I'm like, Tulsa? Like, what? I Googled Tulsa. 2 things came up: the Gathering Place and the Massacre. Right. I'm like, why would I, like, what y'all doing there? Is it tumbleweeds in the street? And is it, y'all riding on horses? Like a cowboy hat? I thought I had such a uninformed impression in my mind of what was here. And so I moved here in the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Sight unseen. June of 2020.
Okay.
And the weekend of the Trump rally, the weekend of Juneteenth.
Oh, Lord.
They had the downtown boarded up because they thought that there was going to be a riot. And so they moved my flight actually twice because I couldn't get into my house into where they were going to be staying. And so, I mean, but like you're saying, when I got here, I was pleasantly surprised.
Right.
I was like, and now I have no thoughts or aspirations about going back. Like, it's like, I like coming downtown and not having traffic. I like seeing the sun every day. I like having conversations with people that are friendly and without pretense. You know, I like that, you know, what you see is what you get in Tulsa. Like, there's not a whole lot of pomp and circumstance about random things, you know. So it's not performative in that way, right? And so when I started to think about like where I am in life now, I'll take this simple version of life rather than all of the other things that, there may be more attractions along the coast, but I'm not that attracted to it anymore. I like the comfort and the simplicity of life that Tulsa offers. And so it definitely, so I hear what you're saying 100%. Like when you're trying to, you know, you're looking for this place that feels like home, but isn't home. It's Tulsa doesn't feel like my home, but it feels like home to me. Right. And it's been such a it's one of the greatest decisions I think I made in my life.
I agree.
Yeah.
I second that. I love the neighborhood feel.
Absolutely.
Where like I could literally walk down the street and see you. Like I could walk to the bookstore and see someone I know. Like it does. I have this phrase that I've been saying a lot, and this is only in Tulsa. Right. Where you just walk into a place and you leave with a friend. Right? I haven't felt like that since college, I want to say. It has that vibe where, you know, I can walk, you know, to everything. So I can walk to Guthrie Green. So I can walk to, you know, on Wednesdays, they have the food trucks. Like, oh, let me just go over here and walk and see what's happening. And whenever I walk over there, I see at least 2 or 3 people that I know. So I'm giving hugs and I'm waving at people.
And you're new to the city.
And I'm new to the city. That's the crazy part. As I feel like this, because Japan felt very lonely during COVID because we were very separated and isolated. As lonely as Japan felt is as friendly and neighborhoody as Tulsa feels. It feels like the exact opposite. It feels like community. It feels like this is place where I should be.
That's good. That's good. Okay, 2 more questions and we'll do a call to action. Next question is, can you tell me about a time, I ask every guest this, can you tell me about a time when you had to hold on to hope, okay? And you didn't know if it was going to work out, you didn't know what was going to happen. How did you hold on to hope through this period of time? And what was the outcome?
I think I would have to pivot back to, I know I experienced a foreclosure, but we went through that. I think I've had some crazy experiences, to be honest, but I'll use this one. I remember like I came back from Japan for holiday. So during the last, I think the second or third year, somewhere in between there, mentally, it was not the best. The grandmother that had spoke about earlier, she had actually passed away, unfortunately, while I was in Japan. Because it was COVID, there were no flights in or out. So it was my first time, and my grandma, I grew up with her, right? So this is my close grandmother on my maternal side. I'm the person, I said, I'm the first grandchild, so I'm her favorite, is what I say. So it was very difficult to experience that by yourself in a foreign country. And to attend a virtual funeral where you're watching other people, like your whole family is there, but you're not, you're on a screen and no one can hug you or comfort you. It was just mentally not the best. And I think during that phase is probably the time where I've had to hold on the most, where in terms of emotionally, I've never felt the depths of despair and emotional isolation I've ever experienced in my life. Luckily, I just had people who were there for me. So I had friends in the States who they knew that something was wrong, but they couldn't get to me, right? But they were just like, check in, hey, how you know? There was phone calls and things like that. And I had one friend in particular, he was like, Ashley, something's wrong. It's like, you need to talk to someone. And I think just having someone see you, right? Even if they can't see you, care in that way, allowed me to get to the place of finding a therapist and finding the space of hope, right? Because it wasn't, it felt very hopeless, right? And the therapist had to help me understand, like, you need to go outside, you need some sunlight, you need some things. Like, some of this is your thought process, and you can help with that. Some of this is grief of your grandmother, and some of this is grief of things that you haven't processed because you're a Black woman in America, right? And you haven't had the time because you've always been moving and shaking. So it was in those experiences where I'm like, oh, this is the feeling that I needed in terms of help.
Yeah.
And once I got the help, I was like, oh, this is why it's not therapy. This is why coaching exists, right?
Yeah.
This is why people need to know these stories. This is why I'm very open about all the things that I've healed from. I talk about therapy. I talk about my grandmother's bereavement, and I talk about grief. I talk about being unemployed. I talk about being unemployed multiple times. I talk about foreclosure. I talk about all these things publicly because I've experienced them. And normally, privately, you have these like side conversations, and there's shame and embarrassment and a feeling of hopelessness. And I want to tell people that, yes, those things happen. Life does life.
Yeah.
And afterwards, there's a wonderful, beautiful beginning, because if I hadn't experienced all those things, I wouldn't be here in Tulsa. I wouldn't be talking to you.
It's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say it's easy. People are like, oh, it's not easy. It definitely sucks. It hurts.
Yeah.
Right? But if you can just push through and just keep going, even when you don't want to, on the other side, once you get there, it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's worth it. It's one of the most profound experiences I'll ever have.
Wow. That's good. Last question. What was the impetus for, and can you tell us a little bit about Resume ATM? How did your life's work impact and inform Resume ATM?
Resume ATM. So you're gonna have to slow me down because I get super excited about this. But the short version is, throughout my career, even though I've had these incredible setbacks, I've had these amazing experiences.
Yeah.
Right. Like I said, I've worked in Silicon Valley. I've made six figures, make six figures now. I don't have a problem talking about that. And I couldn't quite understand how other people weren't able to do this. So now as a recruiter, you're able to see very plainly the differences, particularly around ethnicity, people that were prepared and people that weren't prepared in terms of interviewing, what the resume looked like, how they answer interview questions. You were able to hear what the hiring manager said before and after the interviews. You're like, oh, this is information I probably needed to know a while ago.
Right.
And since I worked in HR, I've never not worked in HR after my first HR job.
Got it.
Every job since then has been HR. Not always recruitment, but always in that space.
Right.
Learn about the processes, the procedures. You learn about salary scales. You learn all this information. Then I became a certified career coach. And my people were still struggling. And I'm like, guys, what's happening? While this is happening, I'm still doing resumes, right? I've done resumes since college. And resumes have always helped people land jobs. And people hate it. People hate resume writing. People hate it so much.
I'll pay somebody in a heartbeat to write it. Yeah.
And I actually got tired of resume writing myself. I used to charge a lot for resumes just so that I could decrease the volume of people, but they would pay. I'm like, this is interesting. So when I was in Japan trying to figure out, and then in Japan, there was a whole separate conversation around, there's a group called Black Women in Japan. So a lot of them are teachers, and they're trying to segue into other industries. So then, of course, my name kind of came up around careers and resume writing. And I'm like, there has to be a way to do this work that no one really wants to do. Like, I like it, but not all the time. So that's where Resume ATM comes from. Resume ATM is a software, it's a program, it's a system that we've developed where we do the parts that everybody hates around their job to help them land their dream job.
Got it.
Right? So we do resume writing for people. We do the job searching and job matching. That's also a problem where most people are applying for the wrong jobs, which is why they get rejected. And the rejection leads to feelings of work hurt and I'm not qualified and their confidence takes it. Like all these things happen as a result of the job search. And then finally, we do automated applications because then the other complaint is, okay, I've done my resume. I found the right job. I'm going to apply for this job and it takes 45 minutes, right? And now I have to copy and paste all these information from these boxes, right? From my resume onto this application, and people are just frustrated. And I said, what if I could do all that? What if I could handle all that? And I had a thought and I was like, oh, let's try it. And then we tried it and then people said yes. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. So that's actually where Resume ATM actually came from. It was a thought process. And we got our first sales in 2023.
Nice.
We brought in my HR project manager and we're building tech and we're rocking and rolling. We have customers, we have clients. We're like, oh, this is a thing. And we're helping people change their lives and experience career freedom through Resume ATM.
Nice. So How do people find it? Like what? Like is it a website? Is it? What is the revenue model too? Is it subscription based or?
Yeah. So if you go to resumeatm.io, they can go straight to the website, or resumeatm.com. It'll take you to the same place.
Okay.
And we have a subscription-based model.
Okay.
So it's $75 per month per person.
Okay.
There's no required, you only have to be with us 6 months or 3 months. There's none of that. You want to be with us 1 month and you leave, that's fine. You stay as long as you want.
Right.
So that's the way the model is set up.
Okay.
And they can go resumeatm.io to find out more information and to get started. Right.
Wonderful.
Right. And if they want to get started with me, they can just visit me on LinkedIn, Dr. Ashley Dash.
Got it. Call to action for our listeners. What's some final words for our listeners?
I feel like I say kind of the same things a lot.
Okay.
I'm not going to say the same thing again. I think, right? We're not going to make any changes, right? No, we're not going to make any changes.
I'm going to switch it up right now.
I'm not going to switch it up.
I love it.
I think it's so important for people to just take the next step, right? In terms of what they're looking for. And some people say, well, I don't know what that step is. I don't know if it's the right step. It doesn't matter.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
If you just take the next
keep moving
step, whether it's a logical step or an unlogical step, sometimes you'll have a thought. You're like, where'd that come from? Well, as long as it doesn't hurt or harm anyone is what I say, take that next step and you would be surprised on where it leads. Yeah. I had that thought with Resume ATM, and I had a random person come in my mind that I hadn't talked to in years. And I said, that was weird. And then I reached out to him on LinkedIn and he was like, sign me up. And he's the reason why we were able to get sales so early. Right. And it was because I took the next step. I was like, well, it's not going to hurt anything to reach out. If he doesn't respond, then it's not a big deal. If he says no, then maybe he'll know somebody who is, right? Yep. So I think people, when you're feeling hopeless, you have to know that there's an other side to it. You can get through it, but you got to take the next step. You got to keep moving. You got to keep going.
Wonderful. I love that. This has been so well spent. What are your socials? How do you want people to reach out to you?
Yes. I'm only available on LinkedIn, guys. Okay. I don't do all the socials. Okay. I don't do the Instagram, the Facebook. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Okay. And if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, it's free. You need to set one up. Okay.
Wonderful. Dr. Ashley Dash on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. So you guys heard it from her. All right. We are, I want you to please take some time and share, and follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on IG. And we have a wonderful guest coming this next term as well. We got a treat for you coming up. So I want you to sit tight, all right? But thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much, Dr. Ashley Dash.
Thank you.
For carving out this time for us. Have a good one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of New Voices. Visit our website at www.newuunlimited.com. That is NEWU Unlimited.com. Follow us on social media at New You Unlimited on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And a special thank you to our producer, Jesse Ulrich. If you're looking for self-improvement, join our programs for personal and professional development. New You is a way for diverse talent to imagine, discover, and actualize a 2.0 version of yourself. Bring your future into focus.